Just that's why I want to start because I remember recording. I want to start before I forget. Okay, so in the Torah portion, two portions we're reading now. We've started again from the beginning, which is to me it's always refreshing. It's nice to have a new start. Morning. And the Torah is laying out for us in the first book of the Torah. It's laying out what appears to be historical stories. There's no mitzvahs. If the Torah is a user's manual and there are 613 mitzvahs, that we're not up to that yet. This is all biographical data, I guess you'd call it, of humanity, the unfolding of the Hebrews who would eventually become the Jewish people. But that's not until the second book of the Torah. So we have stories Abraham and Sarah and Isaac and Rebecca, and we had last week Noah and his family and Adam and Eve. All of these, from a looking at the Torah from an inside-out perspective, not just as a piece of literature, but as God's gift to us. The entire Torah is meant to be a guidebook for life. And therefore, when we read about Abraham and Sarah, we need to absorb the story and then see, okay, how am I Abraham and now how am I Sarah? What if I don't see the lesson to me, and it's each of us, the lesson to me in 2025, then I might be able to ace a test on the story, but I didn't get the message because it's not just about what was, it's about what is and where we're going. That's what the Torah is. Torah is a teacher. The word Torah itself means it's a teacher, not a teacher, a history teacher, but a teacher of life. How we go the path of life. So for that, often we have to dig a little deeper, sometimes much deeper, but just to be able to grapple with it. So Abraham and Sarah were really only introduced to them in the data. They're like in the 60s and 70s. So, and we miss scripturally, we miss a very, very rich part of life, decades, not mentioned. Those are in our tradition, they're recorded in the Medrash and the Talmud, and they're all really important. But the selection of what's in the scripture, what's not in the scripture, tells you something about what the author, well, God saw as something that's going to be consistently relevant message-wise. Very important, central messages for our own day-to-day life going forward in history. So this week's Torah portion, last week, what we read yesterday, opened up, Abraham is 75, Sarah's younger, and they go through a bunch of different scenarios. Just a very small sampling of their lives. That we dealt with that. This week's Torah portion, Abraham is 99, Sarah is 90, and this is taking us really to the end of Sarah's life and getting pretty close to the end of Abraham's life. So looking at some of the vignettes that are in the scripture is not only looking at the Torah and saying this is the story, it's trying to find what does it mean for us and our own struggle for a meaningful life, I guess is the way to put it. So we're going to do that today. We're going to deal with one. First of all, we'll just look at a, and you'll hear. I mean, I'm going to mention this from time to time because I think it's a really important thing. Just how we position ourselves mentally and emotionally and spiritually as we read this. Okay, so we'll just do an overview because we're going to only deal with one snippet of this. The overview of what we're going to be reading this coming week. God reveals himself to Abraham 3 days after his circumcision at age 99. Painful thought. He was the first one who was circumcised. God told him at the end of yesterday's reading to circumcise himself. But Abraham rushes off to prepare a meal for 3 guests who appear in the desert heat. That's the way the scene opens up. He's sitting in a tent. God reveals himself to him. All of a sudden, he sees out of the corner of his eye, in the middle of this divine revelation. It says, "Oh, hold that thought. I got people to take care of." And he takes care of these 3 people who actually aren't people. They are angels disguised as people. One of the 3 who are angels disguised as men announces that in exactly 1 year, the barren, the heretofore barren, Sarah will give birth to a son. And Sarah laughs because, hey, this ain't happened. That ship sailed in her mind. Abraham pleads with God to spare the wicked city of Sodom. Sodom, Gomorrah, it was a few cities actually, and they were extremely cruel to each other and to visitors. And God says, I'm going to destroy them. So 2 of the 3 disguised angels arrive in the doomed city, where Abraham's nephew Lot extends his hospitality to them and protects from the evil intentions of a sodomite mob. The 2 guests reveal that they have come to overturn the place and to save Lot and his family. Overturn the place means to destroy it. Lot's wife turns into a pillar of salt when she disobeys the command not to look back at the burning city as they flee. While taking shelter in a cave, Lot's 2 daughters, believing that they and their father are the only ones left alive in the world, get their father drunk, lie with him, and become pregnant. 2 sons born from this incident fathered the nations of Moab and Ammon. Got a dysfunctional family here. Abraham moves to Gerar, where the Philistine king Avimelech takes Sarah, who is presented as Abraham's sister, to his palace. In a dream, God warns Avimelech that he will die unless he returns the woman to her husband. Abraham explains that he feared he would be killed over the beautiful Sarah. Now, at the end of the Torah portion, God remembers his promise to Sarah and gives her and Abraham a son. Obviously, he wouldn't forget it, but we'll get to that another time. We behold this on Rosh Hashanah a lot, the idea of God remembering as though he could forget. God forbid. He who is named Isaac, Yitzchak means will laugh. Isaac is circumcised at the age of 8 days. Abraham is 100 years old and Sarah 90 at their child's birth. Hagar and Ishmael are banished from Abraham's home and wander in the desert. God hears the cry of the dying lad and saves his life by showing his mother a well. Avimelech makes a treaty with Abraham at Beersheba, where Abraham gives him 7 sheep as a sign of the truce. Okay. What we're going to deal with today is Abraham and his response to God telling him, I'm going to destroy these metropolises of a lot of people in Sodom and Gomorrah. And God says, not working. I'm going to destroy them. And Abraham responds. Now, we bear in mind, Abraham was he's described as a lover of humanity. He breathed compassion and kindness and caring. So the people who lived in the Sodom and Gomorrah in those areas, they were like the polar opposite. You'd think he really doesn't like them too much. And the idea, and he sees them and their behaviors as a blight on humanity. And when God says, that's it, I'm getting rid of them, he might say, cool, or at least, okay, no problem. I mean, be a little classier, but they're not much of a loss. They're taking up space. But as the Torah tells us, he pushes back pretty adamantly against God. So we want to talk a little bit about Abraham and his response. But let's get into the scripture of it first, from the Torah portion. That'll be on text 1, which is, I played a little bit with the slides, so figure out where they're here. Text 1. So if you think about it, in the Torah portion, God has revealed himself to Abraham. So, and it doesn't say clearly when the revelation ends. So if you follow the narrative, it's God, Abraham is, God says, starts talking to Abraham. Abraham says, 1 second, I'll be back in a minute. I'm going to take care of my guests. Then he comes back and God speaks to him. And then it's almost like God starts to talk to himself as Abraham's standing there. And so God says, Shall I hide from Abraham what I'm about to do? And he means about destroying Sodom and Gomorrah. After all, Abraham is to become a great and populous nation, and all the nations of the earth are to bless themselves by him. For I have singled him out, that he may instruct his children and his posterity to keep the way of God by doing what is just and right, in order that God may bring about for Abraham what has been promised him. So you're led into God's mindset. Okay, we've been talking about God saying you're going to have a child, and then God saying, "Should I tell him? You got to tell him." So now he says, God says, Abraham, I want you to know the outrage of Sodom and Gomorrah is so great, and their sin so great. I will go down to see whether they have acted altogether according to the outcry that has reached me. If not, I will take note. And the angels went from there to Sodom. There were the angels who had come to him to tell him about that she's having a child. They go to those cities, while Abraham remains standing before God. So Abraham's still there. Text 2, the next verse, which they didn't put, they split them for a reason, because we're going to be talking about this. Abraham, text 2 is on page 959. Abraham approaches God, or approaches, and says, whoa, will you actually destroy the righteous with the wicked? Did you just tell me you're going to destroy a whole city? How could you do that? And as we'll see, he gets a little bit more adamant about it. And he says, will the judge of the entire earth not do justice? I mean, he ends up accusing God of being unjust, just pushing it, because God's God. Let's look at text 3. Then we're going to be coming back to focus on text 2, the approach. But first, let's fill out the story. To take it a little bit further, text 3, he says to God, how can you destroy a whole? It's several cities. Suppose there are 50 righteous people in the midst of the city. Will you still destroy it and not bear with the place for the sake of 50 righteous people inside it? It will be sacrilege to attribute to you such an act. To kill the righteous with the wicked, treating the righteous and the wicked alike, it would be sacrilege to attribute this to you. Shall the judge of all the earth not do justice? So he's accusing God of doing something ungodly. So God says, okay, if in Sodom I find 50 righteous within the city, I will tolerate the entire place for their sake. So Abraham then shifts into negotiation mode. Abraham responds and said, behold, I begin to speak to my master, and I am but dust and ashes. But suppose they lack 5 of the 50 righteous. Will you destroy all the city because of 5? Let's say I can find 45. I will not, God says, I will not destroy it if I find 45 there. Going further, 3. Abraham continues to speak to God and says, suppose, how about 40? And God says, okay, I won't destroy it for the sake of 40. Abraham persists, and it says, in a humble way, saying, please let not my master, meaning God, show anger. I want to continue to speak. Suppose 30 are found there. Will you spare them? And God says, I will not destroy it if I find 30 there. He continues, says, here, I wish to speak to the master. Suppose 20.
I'm okay, be in the lecture.
I'm going to take this. Suppose
Until 10:30.
Take care of this in a second. No problem. Should have done that before. Okay. All right. So happens all the time. Okay. Okay. So he said, let not my master show anger, and I will speak just once more. Suppose 10 are found there. He says, I will not destroy it for the sake of 10. Now God departs when he finished speaking to Abraham, and Abraham returns to his place. And then the story of Sodom goes forward. So Abraham has pushed back. Now, take this. I'm going to flip this text 8, which is Rashi, primary commentary in the Torah. We said Abraham approached. What word is not understandable there? You know what approaching means. Abraham is approaching God. And Rashi only comments when there's something that lacks understanding. Rashi clips these two words, Abraham approach, and he says, let me tell you what approach means. The approach can mean 3 different things. We find in the Torah to approach used in the sense of coming near to wage war. As it says in the book of Samuel, Yoav drew near unto the battle. There's an approach, a confrontational approach, an approach of the warrior battle. Approach can also mean of coming near to persuade by entreaty, to coax, to negotiate. And we find that later in the Torah when it says Judah approached Joseph and said, "Oh, my Lord," and that he's trying to coax Joseph, who he doesn't know is Joseph, and when he's in Egypt, trying to get to coax him to do something in their favor. Approaching can also mean to pray, and we find that with Elijah the prophet. Elijah approached and said, "God of Abraham," so approaching can mean 3 things. It can mean approaching with strength and confrontation. In other words, to approach more conciliatory, but to try to massage and guide, or approach in a humble way to pray. All 3. So Rashi tells us Abraham went in with all these methods in mind. He came in with tough words to God, saying, "You're doing what? The judge of the earth won't do justice?" Which is, who talks to God that way? I mean, who talks to God in general? And if you're talking to God, obviously you're a person of great, who has a tremendous amount of connection and morality and vision. And now, do you think God doesn't know what he's doing? But he pushes back, but he also speaks in a conciliatory way, and he prays. Now, what, and this is where we're going. Again, this isn't a study so much of Rashi, but what Rashi's teaching us. Why did Rashi have to complicate things? Abraham approached. Go to the next verse. We know. Abraham approached God. The reason is because, Vayigash. Vayigash, yeah. So here, why is it that he felt forced to it? Because the verse before, and this is a reprise, it's a repeat of text 4, the verse before it says that Abraham approached God, or approached, it says Abraham remained standing before God. Abraham's already with God. What was he approaching? He's there. The Torah goes out of its way to say Abraham is still standing with God. And now Abraham approached. You're there. What are you approaching? So obviously it doesn't mean like when I'm approaching you to give you a book. It means more he adopted an internal posture. He took an approach, or he weighed his approach. And if you look, one of the great biblical commentaries from Spain, actually, and they lived through the Inquisition, says when Abraham heard from God about Sodom, he approached, he drew near. What does that mean? The drawing near was not spatial. This is text 5 on 62. But rather he drew near to do battle on their behalf and to increase praying for them. When you say an approach can be an internal approach. You were talking to somebody, a customer, a supervisor, a neighbor, and then you come and say, I have to change my approach. It's not the way you're walking, it's your approach, your psycho-spiritual, your internal profile. How are you looking at this, and how are you showing up? That's an approach. So Abraham, and this is the core of where we're going to be going. Abraham looked at a situation, and he didn't have his instinctive approach. He looked at the possible approaches and what was going to be an effective, the necessary approach. And that's really where this is going. Because as human beings, often the way we see ourselves is my nature. Our approach is kind of depends how you push my buttons. How you approach me will often tell you how I'm gonna react, because it's reactive. The response, we're saying, of Abraham was chosen by him, saying it's not about my instinct, and it's not about my character and how I was raised or born. So I need to find the appropriate response to this. So if you take a look at text,
what's the significance of just a person thinking there's injustice and speaking to God?
that's great. Now, here's the difference. There are some people who are confrontational people, and they'll be confrontational to anybody. So that person mouths off to God. So there he goes again. Couldn't even when it comes to God, he couldn't control himself. And maybe it's not so much about being moved by the human compassion, even for these people who are living horrible lives, because he's always pushing back. There are some people like that. You say blue, I say white. You say day, I say night. That's the way it is. So Abraham, what the Torah would want us to be is people who don't just go purely in instinct, because our instinct isn't always the barometer of correct. You see, to say what's correct here, and if I'm doing something against my nature, then it's much more likely to be something that I'm constantly choosing. When I'm following my nature, I need to think doubly whether this is just something that I feel like doing, and now I'm rationalizing it, saying this is the right decision. My wife just passed by, and I've mentioned this before. I remember years and years and years ago, we had little kids, and Malki's guiding with her insight into children. I remember one of the kids did something, I can't remember what it was, and I responded in a certain way or reacted in a certain way, I don't remember what it was. And Malka came over to me afterwards and said, that wasn't the way to do it. You reacted. Okay. Malki says, that's not a good thing to do. And then must have been a few days later. Something very similar. The other kids did something very similar. And she did almost the same thing I did. So I walked over to her after. I said, Malk, I think you just reacted. She said, no. I responded. So I said, what? What kind of double standard is that? You did the same thing. What's the difference in reaction response? And what she said was, and I'm assuming it was true, but the lesson is true, is important either way. She was saying, you did it in a knee-jerk way. They got under your skin. You did. You acted. You reacted. Said, I was thinking about what does a situation really need. And I chose something, which happens to be similar to what you did. I did it with consciousnness, and you did it reflexively. Again, that's between me and Malk. We'll take this up with the therapist. But the idea is that it is an important thing, and it's a very Hasidic idea in that, or I shouldn't say Hasidic, an important facet in the Jewish sketch of our human self-betterment and evolution, of not just giving into our reflexes and our instincts, but pausing when there is a stimulus, pausing before the response and saying, what does this need of me? What's my objective and what's the right tool to employ? If we ask ourselves that question, we may find that the tool we should employ is something we're not comfortable employing. But you got to do it anyway. I'm not a confrontational guy by nature. And as I've grown up, to the extent I have, I learned sometimes there's no choice. Either you get it done or you don't get it done. Either you're being a parent or being a whatever it may be, or I'm abdicating. So it's about not just following our nature, but it's about choosing what the moment demands of us. And here, what Rashi is teaching us is that Abraham clearly didn't just go with his nature. How is it so clear? Because he was such a nice guy. He wasn't a confrontational guy. And he says that I am dust and ashes before God. And he's committed his entire life to God. And he's surrendering everything to God. So he's not one who's naturally going to go and just say, hey God, what are you doing? But he did what was difficult because it wasn't about him. He showed up in a situation guided by what the situation needed, not by where he felt comfortable showing up. So, and it says he had three different ways, but the first one was confrontation, even though that's not his style, totally not his style. So let's look a little more at this. Text 6. This is from the Rebbe. Before the verse Abraham approached, it says Abraham remained standing before God. This clearly indicates that Abraham had not physically moved from his place before God. Therefore, Rashi can't interpret approached in the simple sense of a physical movement from one place to another. It couldn't mean that. Rather, we're compelled to say that approach here refers to a spiritual movement. That Abraham shifted from one inner emotional mental state to a new state. And that's why the Torah goes out of its way to say things that aren't usually in there in a narrative. It says he was still standing there and he approached. Because it wants us to understand, Rashi is telling us that the Torah wants us, even the children, to understand that this wasn't about him coming out to talk to God. He changed his mental state because he heard about a need in the world. People are about to die. And now he had to visit he had to revisit his approach and consider his approach and think about it before he responded. So here we're going to get a little bit Kabbalistic. Just to understand, because again, technically it's Kabbalistic, but the idea is really it's very understandable stuff about human personality. In Kabbalistic language, building blocks of the universe and building blocks of our souls, we talk about 10 different, what we'll call it, modalities of how we experience ourselves and how we express ourselves. So there are 3 primary, we'll call it emotional modalities. One of them is called, the first one on the right is called chesed. That's the first of them. Chesed technically means kindness, but doesn't only mean kindness. It means that internal profile approach, which is a connector. It's with someone, maybe you're at a public event and are open to meeting people. You're in connected mode. Where you're sitting with someone you know, and you want to connect, you want to plug in. And that can be with love, which is chesed. It can be generous. It could just, in the way, your body language, the smile, the connectedness. That's a chesed profile. Gevura, that's next one, is more reserved. And it's more, it could be sometimes. So if I'm coming into a crowd, but I really don't understand the culture, I might want to stand back, not because I want to be antisocial. I just want to figure out. You got to watch. You want to understand more of the norms. You want to understand not just plow into it, but it's like if you come into a new company or you join a board, you want to get to know the culture. Stand back a little bit before you start, chiming in and giving ideas. So Gevura is standing back. Gevura, this idea of what we call strength and discipline, because it takes strength and discipline, sometimes they're called, it's to give space. It's in the same axis of bearing responsibility. Responsibility weighs on us. Friendship, love, we're out there. Respect, we stand back. We stand back in fear, we stand back in awe. And responsibility is also this idea of, it's not, you can bear your responsibility with a smile, but it doesn't naturally go with a smile because it's a weight on your shoulders. So that's one is more of the connecting flow. One of them is more the stand back. They're both necessary. The third one, Tiferet, which means beauty, is harmonizing the two. To have your internal traffic controller needs to know in a relationship, certainly in a special relationship at home or at work, is now a time for connectedness, or is now a time to leave space? Maybe someone right now, maybe now is not the time to step into the other person's space because they need time for themselves, or stand back and respect because of just the setting is not for that. There are times when questions and comments are perfect, and sometimes maybe now's not the time. So Tiferet is that ability really to be connected with our deeper selves, to be able to balance how we're going to show up. Some people are just friendly lovers, they're always hugging. Some people are more reserved, and the idea is that really the best thing is to be able to balance them and show up where it's appropriate in the situation. So in the Zohar, in Kabbalah, it tells us that each of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob each experienced God and conveyed godliness through a specific lens, a specific modality, one of the three we just mentioned. Text 9, this is from the Zohar, the basic textbook of Kabbalah. Each one of the patriarchs knew God through his own unique lens. Abraham knew God through chesed, and not only knew God, but experienced God and shared God through chesed, kindness, this connector, which is the attribute of greatness, the right hand of the king, meaning God. This is all Kabbalistic, cryptic language. That is this trait he grasped and never abandoned. His thing was kindness, connectedness, generosity. He constantly did good for people, and this was established about him for his actions aligned with that spiritual level. Isaac knew God through the attribute of Gvura, called strength, but really it's this sense of responsibility that drove him and that he conveyed to others, responsibility to God. For it's called the Torah talks about the fear of Isaac, and remained in awe of him always. He was always overwhelmed by the majesty of God and by his own responsibility to him. And Jacob knew God through the attribute of Tiferet, beauty, harmony, which is a blend of chesed and pachat, fear, strength, and it's called emet. It's truth. You stay true to what you really want, not get caught in a specific lane. This was the trait he embraced. And this is what is written in Micah, you will give truth to Jacob. So if you look here, the three modalities, we mentioned chesed, Abraham embodied and lived, and his life shouted this idea of kindness, generosity. Isaac, one more of a little more austere, but standing back, the idea of responsibility, respect, and so on. And Jacob was the beauty and harmony. So what's most important here is that the chesed, we say, what was Abraham? Abraham embodied not pushing back, being confrontational. It's very kind. It's an easy guy to get along with. So here, the Rebbe asks, text 11, it's well known that Abraham's defining trait, 11 is on page 69, is Abraham my beloved, as Isaiah says. So it's puzzling. How is it possible that Abraham would speak harshly, and especially to God? Even more, of the three approaches, battle, appeasement, and prayer, Abraham began speaking stern words. From this, we understand that although Abraham employed all the methods, meaning going to war, the confrontation, the negotiation, and the prayer, his initial approach was to speak stern words. Now, given his deep love for God, shouldn't he have started with appeasement and prayer? And the end, where the Rebbe is going, is actually kind of what you said, Rhonda, before. For it may be understandable for us in this situation. If anybody walks in here and says, God forbid, people are dying, they're about to do something, we say, what are you doing? If God is saying it to us, maybe we're not going to be so quick to confront the person. Maybe some of us will. For Abraham to go to that modality, to that lens, to that tool, first, must have taken a lot out of him, because he was much more there. Come, let's talk about this. Let's negotiate. Let's talk about interests. I'm sure we can settle this. That was his kind of thing. And he spoke so strongly because he was taking a stand. He needed to. He needed to be able to stand up, not only because about impacting God, because that's what God wanted. That's what we needed to know for posterity. That when we hear about a need, someone in need, our first, we have to show up with strength, even if we don't usually show up with strength. This was a critical story, and that's why I started with this. It's why God chose this story. We can talk about, to give us of the few stories, gives us about Abraham and Sarah. But one of the things, to me, it's very clear, is to show us the response of an actualized human being when he hears about pain, suffering, and death coming to people he doesn't like, or maybe, I don't know if he didn't like them. He certainly doesn't respect their lifestyle. He was into bringing kindness, and they're into bringing cruelty. Life would have been simpler without them. The world would be a better place without them. I think that we can assume that that's certainly what Abraham had in mind and the way he thought. And yet he pushes back. He doesn't start to pray for them. He doesn't even start to negotiate for them. He pushes back with force to tell us how important it is. No matter how we feel, no matter what our instincts are, someone else in need has to really, really touch a deep chord with us, within us. And we go to text 12. This is from the previous event. We see another profound aspect in the way our forefather Abraham acted with goodness and kindness. Of course, he was guided by intellect and deep inner intention with the goal of bringing people closer to God. But his acts of goodness and kindness were not just the result of his naturally good character. He said, you're making a mistake. If you look at Abraham and say, some people grow up, we all have different ways of dealing with things. Someone has a naturally kind, easygoing, giving character, and now you see them doing something which is kind and giving, you say, they're in character. They're acting in character. And very often that's the truth. What the Torah is teaching us is that Abraham was always looking not to follow his character, but to see what's God asking of him now. He was always looking the goal of bringing people closer to God. But these acts of goodness and kindness were not just the result of his naturally good character. Rather, it was because of God's will. This is what it means to truly carry out a mitzvah, exclusively because this is what God wants. You know, my father, of blessed memory, who spent decades accomplishing tremendous things as a leader in the Jewish community, his personality, let me pull back. I met over the years many of his schoolmates before he was married, and I heard again and again and again, we would never imagine a father would even speak in public, let alone do all things, see him with presidents, whatever, because that's not who he was. And he told me that. He used to tell me. I mean, especially then in his life, I was spending so much time with him in treatment. I heard it since I'm a child, but he was a naturally more retiring, maybe academic type. And the Rebbe told him, "You need it for something else." And till his last day, he was pushing against his instincts, less so at the end, but pushing against his instincts to show up the way he needed to. He had to do it. And he used to tell me more often than I liked, there's that sometimes he said, you have to, you're in leadership. He used to use a Yiddish expression. I don't know why he used this expression exactly, but there's a Hasidic hat which we don't even wear. It's called a shtreimel, the fur hat. And he used to tell me in Yiddish, put on a shtreimel and do your job. I don't care. It's not about what you think, what you want. It's what you got to do your thing. But that's the way he lived. So it's not about me and what I want. It's what needed of me. This is what we're talking about here. This was the way Abraham served God, even with his trait of kindness. Everything he did wasn't driven by his inherently kind nature, but rather in order to fulfill God's will. Therefore, when the particular divine intention of chesed, kindness, was not applicable, he also displayed the attributes of judgment and strength. He wasn't trapped in his personality. He listened, he understood, he paid attention, and he said, if what's needed now is something that's not my personality, that's what I'm going to do, because what's needed of me is more important than my comfort. That's not a normal human thing. We like to go with the flow. And count me in on that. It's life is so much easier. We have our flow. We have the current of our personalities. And what the Torah is asking us, and the Torah, through telling us about Abraham, is that really what should be defining the way we respond to the world is what the world needs, not what makes me comfortable. This episode in the Torah, in text 13, this is from the Rebbe. This episode in the Torah is a powerful instruction to all of Abraham's children. When a situation arises involving saving a Jewish soul, whether in physical or spiritual danger, to bring the hearts of Jews closer to their Father in heaven, don't hesitate or calculate. Get involved with all your strength, even in a manner that feels contrary to your nature, even if it involves speaking harshly. Make use of all available means: battle, appeasement, and prayer. And this is, this is the Torah lesson. Do what you got to do. Something else comes to mind, and I don't remember if we spoke about this here recently. It definitely came up in the past month or two, somewhere. There's a rabbi, and if I told this to you, it's okay. You can tell me I said this already. There's a rabbi who passed away probably 10, 15 years ago. He was a rabbi in Nashville, Tennessee, Chabad rabbi, who built a beautiful community in Nashville, Tennessee. And when I was younger, he was he was a Chabad rabbi, but he wasn't European, which is very interesting to me because he was American. His parents were European. All my teachers were all European, and and which was great. I respected them, but I'm American, and I didn't. There was always a little bit of a gap. And here he was a Chabad rabbi who understood American psyche and spoke the American mindset, and it was meaningful to me. And he wrote a book called "Speak English but Think Jewish," which was to me it was because he was talking to guys like me, and I read the book many times when I was a kid. So I saw an interview with him, um, and as he got older, he said when he grew up in Pittsburgh, and when he got older, so he used to come for Rosh Hashanah. He used to come to Crown Heights, and after services, the first day Rosh Hashanah, we go to the back here to the river. There's no river on Eastern Parkway. So what would they do? They would walk down Eastern Parkway, maybe it's a mile, to Botanical Gardens. And there's running water, and they would say the prayer. So he went along. So as they're walking, and the Rebbe was, this must have been 1950 or something, 1951. So it was just the Rebbe was much younger, and it's just a common Rebbe. The Rebbe said, we have to sing a Hasidic tune as we walk. So we have a crowd of people. I don't know how big Chabad was that, but 200 people, whatever it was, walking down Eastern Parkway, and they're singing. And this 13-year-old is looking at people looking from the windows, and he is absolutely mortified. I attract attention. He said, he said, I wanted to just bury myself. And he held back a little bit, whatever. He, it was very emotionally very difficult for him because that's not what you do. You're in public. The next year, he came back for Rosh Hashanah, and there was to go walk down Eastern Parkway, but he's now, fool me once. But here, what he did was he walked with an elderly rabbi, Chabad rabbi, who couldn't keep up. So he figured he'll stay behind. So they're walking up ahead and they're singing, and meanwhile he's more with the same group. And he says a guy walked over to them as they're walking down the street. Says, well dressed, without a kippah, and he wishes them Happy New Year. He's obviously Jewish himself, and he says, are you with those people? Yeah, but he says, I love this. I saw this last year also. I love people, Jews walking in the street, proud that they're Jewish. And he said, I need to learn from that. That it's you know, just be proud of who we are. And he said it dawned on him, especially this was a post-Holocaust community where everybody's just like, keep your head down. If they're not bothering you, don't bother them. Hope they don't see you and just move forward. So the Rebbe was trying to tell us, teach people, say, you can walk in the street like a Jew. Baruch Hashem, thank God we're in America. You can do that. And he wanted to get them out of the ghetto mentality. So he was saying he learned from that. And I could totally relate to that because I also don't like making, attracting attention in the street. Obviously, when I walk in anywhere, I attract attention because, well, but it is I got over it for myself because I can't avoid attracting attention just because I look different. But I'm still not going to walk around singing in the street. But sometimes it's okay. It's okay. Yeah, you got to choose your moments. But the idea is, and I'm going to bring this, not we shouldn't be guided only by our instincts. We should be guided by what is the right thing in this situation. And sometimes it's going to be something that's not comfortable for us, and that's okay. That's called living and not just being carried along by our likes and dislikes. So I'll leave this over here. Are there any questions? Yep. And it's not, what's the question?
Wasn't there an agreement with Noah that this is the last time we kill everybody? So did we just willow it down to 10 people
No.
instead of?
Well, it's a good question. If you look at what the agreement with Noah was, they said, I will never again bring something to destroy the entire world. This was a few cities, which each person is a world, but it wasn't at the same level. Now, even there, though, as you see, you're right. So last year we learned about the idea that there's a lot of tragedy in wiping the slate clean with the entire world. But even if if you tell me there's a city of neo-Nazis and God said he's going to zap them all,
Yeah.
I got other problems.
No worse.
But Abraham says that's not right. That's not right. Stand up. Put him in jail. That's fine. But the idea is to stand up, not to be nonchalant, accepting of human suffering, even if it's humans who are really not doing good stuff. It should bother us.
So
Yeah.
I was going to ask that question. So yeah.
Go ahead. Yeah.
I guess what troubles me is so many times it seems like God stands by and watches others decimate the Jewish population.
Happened a lot.
I don't understand that since we're his peace. And
Yeah. So
why doesn't he have our back more?
So I'm with you, okay? And the Rebbe was with you, asking God to intervene. But what I would say is that just not to answer it, because I'm not God's defense attorney, and I think God should step in. But there's something the Talmud tells us that there's language that Moses used in the Torah talking about God, and it says God, the great, the valiant, and the awesome. And that is Hakel HaGadol HaGibur VaNoira. And that is in how we address God at the beginning of our Amidah. And the Talmud tells us that after the destruction of the first temple, and which was a Holocaust in its own right, Jeremiah said, valiant? How am I going to call God valiant? Look what just happened. I can't do that. Daniel said, awesome? I can't do that. And therefore, it seems like that wasn't used. Like they literally even amended the prayers because it doesn't match. How did you let this go on? Then there were people who came across the rabbis of the Great Assembly, the Great Knesset, who really structured Judaism post that Holocaust, Second Temple. And they said that God, when we're suffering, God is suffering. And it takes incredible self-restraint on God's part not to intervene in order to maintain this idea that people have free choice. Because every time a person starts up with a Jew, they get zapped. They don't become better people. They just learn not to touch us, which is fine with me. But this is all about people making moral choice. So they restored. They're called the Great Knesset because they restored those two words. They say it's not that God is ambivalent or doesn't care. Is God is chomping at the bit but restraining because I can't. I set up this situation where people have free moral choice. I got to let it go on, which doesn't make me feel better, but it's a theological question. Yes,
Rabbi, if I would just build on that a little bit, and I apologize if I'm being contrarian, something like a tsunami that is just out there, and it's neutral sort of. It's not against
Moral, yeah.
anybody. It just happens. It doesn't, I guess, help them. Well, maybe it helps some moral choice in terms of how people react and help each other after that to come together, but it's almost somewhat arbitrary when people die in a huge tsunami effect or flood or anything like that. Natural disaster, I would say.
Leon, I have the same problem. I have a bigger problem, theological problem, with a tsunami than with the Nazis in a way, because the Nazis they're terrible people. They made terrible choices, and
Right.
God didn't intervene. Okay, so God didn't intervene. I have a problem with that, but okay, there's no morality there, and God allows this within nature. I get it. I'm with you there. Maybe one day we'll find out. Actually, not maybe one day.
So it's not necessarily that we're paying for the sins of Adam and Eve. Are we?
It could be part of the fact that we bring a moral disequilibrium into the world. I don't know. We all have a great week.
Yeah.